Hello, it's Natasha N.K.O. I'm back with BB Moore Campbell's Brothers and Sisters. I've been a bit lax with the reading lately. This is chapter 17. Last read was 16. And a reminder about what was last read is where Esther finally hooked up with the guy that she doesn't think is good enough for her. Tyrone, and I think she recently hired that young black girl that she wasn't sure about, Lakeisha. All right, chapter 17, page 212. A fierce March rain was coating the slick city streets outside the bank. Kirk liked the view inside better. From where he sat in a multi-purpose room, if he craned his neck just slightly, he could get a stronger whiff of the soft, musky perfume that Mallory was wearing, and at the same time, a better look at the thin expanse of ivory thigh that the slit in her skirt revealed. A Latino man was addressing the group. "Picture this," he said, in softly accented English. "You arrive for a staff meeting on Monday morning. You're a little early and the boss isn't there yet. There are 3 people who are already seated. You approach them smiling and are about to greet them when you notice that they are all speaking Spanish. How does that make you feel?" The employees, who were arranged in a horseshoe facing the speaker, had the collectively skittish mien of colts who wanted nothing so much as to bolt out of their confines and head for open ground. People shifted in their seats, averting their eyes from the speaker and one another, finding something in their programs to examine. "Come on, isn't anyone going to answer my question?" This was the 10th week of diversity awareness sessions, and as Kirk made the rounds with Mallory, he couldn't help feeling that the meetings were becoming tedious and redundant. The trainers always seemed to want to incite some sort of infantile discussion about feelings by tossing lead-ins as threatening as hand grenades. The message always seemed to be the same. All men were sexist, and all white men were sexist and racist. The poor minorities and the poor women were never at fault. They were just the victims of white men's oppression. What a crock. He hadn't oppressed anyone. What the sessions needed to do was instruct people how to compete, how not to blame other people for their own problems and lack of accomplishments. What could Preston Sinclair simply be thinking of, wasting the bank's money in this way? Kirk stole a look at Mallory and let his eyes wander from her throat to her breasts and then back down to her thighs. She uncrossed her legs suddenly, and Kirk raised his head. He caught Mallory's eye and indicated the door with a nod. "What a ridiculous question," Kirk said as soon as they were in the hall. "It's rude when people speak a foreign language in front of others who don't understand it. I mean, that's the sort of thing that should be done in the home, not a place of business." "Well, I guess sometimes, if it's your first language, you just sort of slip into it," Mallory said. He shrugged his shoulders and directed his eye to the slit in her skirt, which gaped with every step she took. Mallory was such a petite woman. Dainty was the word for her. He could probably lift her with one hand. That's how delicate she was. Such a pretty woman. "Things are going to be changing for me here soon," Kirk said suddenly, his voice low and careful. "Just between you and me, I think I'm about to be named the permanent regional manager. In fact, I'm sure I am." What did it hurt to tell Mallory his good news? After all, Bailey had as good as told him the job was his. He stole a look at Mallory's pretty face to see the effect of his words. At that moment, making an impression on Mallory seemed to be all he wanted to do. Esther looked up when she heard the light tapping. The door to her office opened and Mallory stuck her head in. "You busy?" "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize you were in a meeting." Esther was seated at her desk and a young black woman was in a chair next to her. Cards were spread out in front of them. They both had the same startled expression on their faces. Mallory thought, as if she were an intruder. She felt a funny tightness seep into her chest. She felt a funny tightness seep inside her chest as she watched Esther pick up the cards with a deft, almost sneaky movement and drop them inside her desk drawer. For the first time in a long time, Mallory sensed that she wasn't welcome. Even though Esther and the young woman were now smiling at her, she still felt like a young girl watching others play in a circle game she wasn't invited to join. Mallory Post, Esther said warmly. I'd like you to meet Lakeisha Jones. Lakeisha is the new teller I've hired. Today is her first day. Mallory tried not to look surprised. Esther had led her to believe that she was hiring a young man. David somebody or other. Of course, she was entitled to change her mind if she thought she'd found a better candidate. But why this girl, Lakeisha? What kind of name was that? The young woman was neatly dressed in a medium-length black skirt and white blouse. Her black shoes had sensible low heels and were newly shined. Tiny gold hoops were her only adornments. She didn't even wear nail polish on her short, oval-shaped fingernails. Her hair was smooth and short, a suitable style for the bank. And yet, as she observed her, Mallory thought that there was something unappealing, and maybe even a little threatening about her. Well, welcome to Angel City, Mallory said, extending her hand to the young woman. Thank you, Lakeisha said. She shook Mallory's hand, but she looked at Esther the entire time. There was something a little rough around the edges about her, Mallory thought. The girl didn't seem mature enough for the job. She didn't seem responsible. Watching the two black women standing so close together, she wondered how the new girl would enhance Esther's position. Not that she'd be held accountable for everything an underling did, but still, hiring someone who didn't work out could reflect poorly upon her judgment. Like that DeAndre character. What a joke. That almost cost Esther politically. Only she was able to salvage things by getting rid of him quietly, before Charles realised just how badly he'd screwed up. As she looked Lakeisha over, Mallory wondered why Esther hadn't stuck with David what's-his-name. She'd seen a glimpse of him. He looked responsible. He looked qualified. This girl appeared to have a chip on her shoulder. Mallory released Lakeisha's hand. Nice to meet you, Lakeisha said, her voice hardly audible. Mallory stepped back. Her eyes met Esther's cool, steady gaze. She knows that I don't like Lakeisha, Mallory thought. The notion made her feel panicky. As if to cover her feelings, she smiled brightly at the new teller. I'm really glad you're here. Esther can use some help. I'm sure you'll be happy. She smiled again, hoping she sounded gracious and welcoming. Mallory watched as Esther put her hand on the girl's arm. She said, Why don't you go on back outside? If you have any questions, ask Hector, all right? Thank you, Esther, she nodded toward Mallory. After Lakeisha left, Mallory sat down in front of the desk. I thought you were hiring a young man, she blurted out. I changed my mind, Esther said curtly. She put her hands on her hips. The gesture was unconscious. As soon as she realised what she'd done, she dropped her hands. Mallory laughed nervously. Well, I hope she'll work out. She leaned forward eagerly. Anyway, you know why I really came by. How did the date go? The wave of annoyance Esther had felt initially passed. This is not going to satisfy every love connection fantasy you've ever had, she said, but you will be happy to know that we had a great time. All right. He drives an old Audi, but it's clean and shiny. We went to a Jamaican restaurant and then we went dancing, and he can really dance. We necked in the car and it was divine. And then he took me home and... Esther grinned at Mallory, who began giggling. And then on Sunday, we went to the beach and to the movies, and we had something to eat. He's really easy to be with. I mean, his grammar's not great, but he is. He's okay, Esther said demurely. Definitely not my type, but he's fun. She looked at her friend, who was staring at her with a child's happy eyes. Esther laughed. Don't give me that look. We're just friends. I'm not in love with him. Mallory smiled her goony smile. Oh, not to change the subject, but you'll be happy to know that Kirk is going to be appointed the permanent regional manager. Why should that make me happy? Esther asked. Because Kirk is going to bring you over to the lending side, that's why. Mallory's face was so full of goodwill and kindness that Esther hated to burst her bubble. She shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. Mallory looked astonished. What do you mean? I mean, maybe. Maybe not. I talked with Kirk. I don't think he's convinced I'm lender material. You just have to show him what you can do, Esther. I've shown him. I've shown everybody. This department was a mess before I took over. I turned it around in less than a year. Look, I'm telling you, he's not going to give me a chance. Their eyes met, and in that instant Esther saw that Mallory discerned her secret thoughts about Kirk. In another moment she knew that the white woman didn't believe her unspoken opinion to be valid. I'll talk to him, Esther, she said firmly. You can't just write him off. After all, he's going to be a very important person in this organisation. Preston Sinclair extended his right hand to Humphrey Boone, who grasped it in his own firm grip. "All right, face front and smile," the photographer said. The flashbulb popped, and Preston breathed a sigh full of relief and exultation. Weeks of delicate negotiating and compromising were over. Next Monday, Humphrey Boone would begin his tenure as Angel City's regional manager and senior vice president in charge of private placement loans at a base salary of $150,000. "Glad to have you on board," Preston said. "Angel City is going to be good to you." "I'm depending upon that," Humphrey said. The reporter from the Gazette had come earlier and asked a few questions. Preston had carefully shaped his answers so that they were segued. Preston had carefully shaped his answers so that they were segued into the topic for which he wanted maximum exposure, his being the architect of the diversity program and the person behind Angel City Bank's hiring the highest-ranking black banker in the city. "At Angel City Bank, we recognise that talent comes in all colours," he said. He thought it was a highly effective statement, almost a slogan, and hoped that the newspaper would use it in the caption under the photograph. "Well," Preston said to Humphrey, as the photographer was leaving, "we'll see you next Monday." He nodded toward the corner where Bailey Reynolds was sitting. "If there is anything you need, either before that time or after you get here, please get in touch with Bailey." Bailey's lips curved up automatically. He nodded his head and his hard eyes glittered as he took in the president's good mood, the way he kept his hand on the black man's back. Humphrey picked up his monogrammed black leather briefcase and walked toward the door. "Thank you for everything. I'm looking forward to next week," he said. "There's still an issue that needs to be resolved," Bailey said softly, once Boone was gone. He smiled mechanically. "Kirk Madison has been acting regional manager for several months now. He's done an excellent job, mostly because the carrot that we agreed to hold out was the prospect that his position would become permanent. He's going to be quite disappointed." "Ah, yes," Preston said. "What do you suggest?" He asked somewhat peevishly. As much as he was able, he left the unpleasant chores to others. Bailey shrugged his shoulders. He could tell that Preston wanted to change the subject quickly. "Well, he was a lender before. Perhaps we can give him back his old job at a slight increase, say 5 to 8%. "5, Preston said quickly. "Take care of the details." "Consider it done." When Kirk Madison put down the telephone in his office, his hands were trembling. "Yes," he said to himself. "Yes, yes, yes." He glanced at the flow chart above his computer and saw a sea of red ink. Every line on the page represented another accomplishment. All those check marks were like a map, taking him where he wanted to go. And he was going up. He flipped open his briefcase and stared into the mirror attached to the back as he combed his hair and adjusted his tie. In 20 minutes he was going to have lunch with Bailey Reynolds. "There's something I want to talk with you about," Bailey had told him. That could mean only one thing. Bailey was waiting in a black Cadillac in front of the bank. "We're going to the marina," the older man said cheerfully after Kirk got in. The marina was a good 30 minutes away. It was the site of leisurely meals, occasions when time wasn't important. The thought of a 3-hour celebratory feast just added to Kirk's excitement. He could imagine his doctor friends taking 3-hour lunches. Maybe he'd run into them. The thought pleased him. The restaurant had an open-air design and overlooked the ocean. "Let's have drinks," Bailey said as soon as they were seated. The waitress was young and cheerful and had sun-streaked hair. They ordered vodka and tonic. Kirk drained his drink quickly and then inclined his body forward. "You have some news for me about the job." "We'll get into that, but let's have our lunch first, shall we? The steak here is the best in the city," Bailey said. They both ordered the steak. "I want mine very, very rare, bloody," Bailey told the waitress, who blinked at the graphic order. "I'm from Chicago," Bailey explained. "I guess I can't get away from my stockyard upbringing. I just love red meat." The woman nodded as she collected the menus. When she had gone, Bailey turned to Kirk with a wide smile. "I know you've been interested in the status of your current position," he said. Kirk's fingers rested on the table. Something in Bailey's tone made him begin to grip the edge. He looked into Bailey's face and saw in an instant that his smile was cold and distant. Bailey cleared his throat, tickled out whatever was clogging it with a series of tiny, efficient coughs. When he finished hacking, his voice had regained its original sunny cadence. Well, Kirk, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that as of today, a new regional manager has been hired. The good news is that we're restoring you to your original position at a 5% raise. Now, I know that you're bound to feel some disappointment, but later, Kirk wouldn't be able to recall the precise time when he stopped hearing Bailey Reynolds. One moment he understood him perfectly well, and the next thing he knew, the older man's mouth was opening and closing, but not a sound was coming out. Kirk slumped back against his chair and shook his head a little, in a vain attempt to both clear his ears and refocus his attention. But Bailey's mouth just kept moving, like that of a ventriloquist dummy. Kirk went over in his mind what he thought he'd heard Bailey say, but he couldn't quite grasp that either. He picked up the drink in front of him. Miraculously, another one had appeared, and drained it. When he raised his head, the power of sight, hearing, and speech returned to him. "You're going to have to repeat that, Bailey." His voice was a grim whisper. "What didn't you hear?" Bailey was somewhat unnerved by the intensity of Kirk's glance and the harshness of his voice. His mind flashed to a recent news article about an employee who had gone berserk after he lost his job. A man who'd returned to his old job with a gun and shot his boss and 5 other people. The boss died. Come to think of it, the papers were full of stories like that. Bailey began tapping his foot against his chair leg. "You're saying I'm no longer the regional manager," Kirk said, his voice dull, his eyes hard, and at the same time quite vacant. "I'm saying that the greater need of the bank is for you to return to your position as a lender with a 5% raise. As he spoke, Bailey realised how paltry the increase sounded. At least Preston could have upped the ante to 8%. "I see," Kirk said. At that moment, the food appeared before them. The blonde waitress, chirping like a happy little bird, asked if there was anything else they wanted. Was everything okay? Bailey poked his steak with his knife. A thin trail of pale red trickled onto his plate. "Fine," Bailey said, smiling. He looked at Kirk. The man looked pale, almost ill. "Look," Bailey said, "I'm really sorry. I know this is rather a surprise. It's a shock to me too. I fully expected that you were going to get the position, Kirk. I was pulling for you." It was difficult to apologise and be detached at the same time, while still appearing pleasant and amiable, but Bailey managed it. As he spoke, some of his fears dissipated, and his foot stopped kicking the chair. Kirk no longer looked enraged. He looked defeated, which was awful to see, but not at all frightening. Bailey was used to seeing vanquished men. He breathed in the savoury aroma of the food that was in front of him. He really was starving. Tentatively, he picked up his fork and knife and cut off a thin slice of meat. Delicious, he thought, as he chewed. Even better than he remembered it. He didn't want to appear insensitive, so he tried not to show how much he was enjoying his food. He rested his silverware on the edge of his plate. "Listen, things like this happen in business. You mustn't think that there are no opportunities for you at Angel City. You'll have other chances." Kirk nodded his head stiffly. "Why don't you eat your lunch?" Bailey said. They ended up leaving the restaurant much earlier than Kirk had anticipated. During the ride back to the office, the 2 men were quiet. As they were nearing the bank, Kirk said suddenly, "Who's been hired to replace me, and when will he come on board?" Bailey had been dreading both questions, hoping that somehow Kirk would be too distraught or distracted to make any practical inquiries. "The man's name is Humphrey Boone, and he'll be starting next Monday." Humphrey Boone. His rival. His adversary. Kirk wanted to ask Bailey what kind of credentials Humphrey Boone possessed that had pushed out a man who managed to unload 28 foreclosed properties in the middle of a recession. But he didn't know if he could keep the resentment from his voice, and he didn't want to betray his feelings to Bailey. "I assume I'll be going back to my old office," Kirk said. Bailey nodded as he pulled up to the curb in front of the bank. "Why don't you take the rest of the day off?" he said as they sat in the car. "I've got a lot to do," Kirk said. The men shook hands. "Thank you for lunch." Kirk closed the door to his office and sat down. In a minute, he told himself, he would wake up and the nightmare would be over. He felt drained, as if he would fall down if he tried to stand up. The flowchart above his computer was a silent reminder of his long days and late nights, his high hopes, all that work, for nothing, all for nothing. He hit the back of his head with his open palm. The smack reverberated in the quiet room. He hit himself again and again and again. Kirk's head was throbbing when he picked up the telephone and dialed his home. He wanted to talk to his wife, but when he heard her voice, he was silent. She sounded so listless. He didn't want the Sheila who was on the other end of the line. He wanted the old, sleek Sheila back, the woman whose voice was always full of laughter and enthusiasm. But that woman was lost to him. To hell with Angel City. I'll quit. The thought rushed through him, filling his head and chest until his entire body breathed his resolution. Yes, he was going to quit. He remembered the 2 beautiful suits he'd recently purchased. He considered Sheila's new health club membership and the bill for the vacation to Maui that they'd taken last year, right after the holidays, on the spur of the moment. A 5% raise wasn't going to cover everything. To hell with the bank. He pulled up his resume on a computer. To hell with all of them. He typed furiously. There was a job out there paying 6 figures with his name on it, and he was going to find it. Just the thought made him feel as though he were kicking in the door of Bailey Reynolds' office. I'll show them all, he said to himself. Fuck Angel City National Bank. Kirk's euphoric state didn't last very long. Sheila was silent for a long time after he told her the news that night in bed. Finally, she said, How could you let such an opportunity slip through your fingers? It wasn't my fault, he said. Nothing is ever your fault, she replied, and then turned her back to him. By the time he got to work the next day, Kirk had his to-do list sketched out in his mind. He'd take his resume to the printer, call 2 headhunters he knew, and start putting the word out, very quietly, that he was in the market. As he strode down the hall, he was so preoccupied with the tasks he set for himself that at first he didn't notice that no one was speaking to him, that people seemed to avert their eyes and rush right past him. But then he became conscious that the greetings he was receiving were muted, mumbled, barely audible. As Kirk turned to go into his office, a woman lowered her head, pretending not to see him as she walked by. That was odd, he thought. Putting his briefcase down, he went out to the kitchenette and poured himself a cup of coffee. Usually at that time of the morning, 2 or 3 people would be standing there with their mugs, but not today. Kirk carried his coffee back to his office and placed it carefully on his desk. As was his practice, he pulled his copy of the Gazette out of his briefcase so that he could glance at the headlines before the day really got started. The picture was the first thing he saw. Preston Sinclair shaking hands with a black man. He peered at the headline. Angel City National hires highest ranking black in banking in the city. At first, the words didn't connect. For a moment, looking at the photograph, he tried to figure out what position the black man would fill. How could such an important job become available and he not know anything about it? Kirk was truly perplexed as he perused the article. Everything jumped into place when he read the caption identifying the smiling black man as Humphrey Boone. Kirk slumped in his chair. The headline played over and over in his head like the words of a hateful song that he couldn't stop singing. Angel City National hires highest ranking black in history. Those bastards. Those fucking bastards. He felt hot and achy and shook his head from side to side, as though he were in a trance. He forced himself to read further and gasped when he came to the statement that Mr. Boone would also head up the newly implemented Minority Loan Program. Preston Sinclair was quoted as saying, With this program, which has been endorsed by the esteemed Reverend Odell Rice, Angel City National Bank hopes to begin its long-term efforts toward turning around the conditions that led to the civil unrest of April 29. Those bastards, those fucking bastards. He recalled Bailey's cunning smile. Keep up the good work. The president is impressed. Good news. That lying bastard. It was a setup, with Bailey feeding him just enough bullshit to keep him hustling and hanging on. All they had wanted was for him to work his arse off while they wooed somebody else who could get them some newspaper coverage. After all his hard work, they were going to hand over the job he deserved to some black guy. And they expected him to take their fucking 5% raise and go back to his old office like a good little boy. Well, they could shove it up their asses. He pictured his hands around Bailey Reynolds' throat, squeezing the smile off his face. He pictured himself putting a gun to Bailey's head and pulling the trigger. Kirk stood up and paced back and forth. He'd never been arrested. He didn't have a record. Getting a gun would be easy. He would go and buy a gun, come back and march right into Bailey's office and Kirk felt a sharp pain just below his throat, and for a minute he couldn't catch his breath. His heart was hammering away inside his chest. He picked up his coffee cup, and when he looked down at his desk, there were huge, dark drops over everything. He set the cup down. Kirk felt as though he was stepping inside a dense fog. He couldn't see himself coming out on the other side. He imagined holding a gun, aiming it, pulling the trigger. Bailey's blood spurting everywhere. Then he'd ride up to the 34th floor and find Preston Sinclair and kill him too. He looked at the picture again and slammed his fist down in a pot of cold coffee. Loser, loser, loser. The words seemed to come from a tape that had always been playing somewhere deep within him. Kirk caught sight of his face reflected in the glass of one of the bright, sunny pictures of floral bouquets that decorated his walls. His hair had fallen into his face, and there was a wildness in his expression that he'd never seen before. To his own eyes, he looked deranged. For a moment, he couldn't remember what he was thinking about, and then he looked at the picture again. The smiling white man, the grinning black man. All right, just calm down, he told himself. Another idea came to him, superior to the first. He didn't have to shoot anyone. Hell, all he had to do was press a few buttons on the computer, lose a few files, wipe out some accounts. Oh, he could make them suffer. He walked around the office jangling his keys, trying to control the conflicting impulses that were bombarding the synapses of his brain. He looked at the picture again, and as the keys in his hand clanked against each other, the jangling resounded inside his head, and he began to feel intense pain around his temples. His eyes hurt, and he felt every breath he took. He reached up and wiped his forehead. When he looked around him, the room seemed to be whirling. I've got to get out of here, Kirk thought. He took one last look at the photograph and noticed for the first time just how dark the black man was, standing next to Preston Sinclair. As he peered at the photo, he thought that Humphrey Boone wasn't smiling. He was smirking. Arrogant affirmative action bastard. He would buy a gun. Kirk decided in the space of time that it took him to cross Spring Street and get to his car. He didn't have time to tinker with computers. He wanted to do something now. The attendant at the parking lot was surprised to see him. You just get here, he said, his words covered with a thick Spanish accent. As soon as he got into the car, he turned on the radio. The jovial voice of King Clever boomed out. My Amerifriends, do you remember the way things used to be? Kirk was too distracted to focus on what King Clever was saying from his exalted radio throne, but the tone of his voice was soothing, and for the first time all morning Kirk felt himself calming down. He drove to where he thought a gun shop was located, but he passed it and couldn't go back easily because of the network of one-way streets that threaded the downtown area. He made a wrong turn, and the next thing he knew, he was on the Santa Monica Freeway, travelling west. For a fleeting moment, he thought about going home, but he got off at La Cienega and headed north toward Beverly Hills instead. Kirk was startled as he emerged from the freeway. He hadn't been in the area in months, and what he saw bore little resemblance to what he remembered. The boulevard he was travelling on looked as if it had been shelled. Along La Cienega, there were gaping holes where businesses used to be. Within the first block, there were the burnt-out holes of buildings that had yet to be demolished. Farther up the street, he passed several vacant lots. What happened here, he wondered. And then, almost as soon as he posed the question, he realised that the street he was on was a casualty of the riots. The violence had come right to the edge of Beverly Hills. Look what those people have done to our city. He pictured the dark, frenzied faces he'd seen in the news. Savages, tearing and clawing, breaking and entering, trying to take what they didn't deserve. Amerifriends, King Clever said in his soothing, all-American radio voice. It's time that Americans get back to the values that this country was founded upon. The people who work hard deserve the rewards. That's not greed, that's the American way. Kirk almost ploughed into the car ahead of him. It was as though the man was speaking to him. His anger drained away as he turned up the radio and let King Clever's voice fill his ears until he couldn't hear anything else. He pulled the car over and parked and listened until the show's bouncy black theme music began playing. Kirk started the car and continued travelling north. He knew where he was going, now that he was thinking clearly. The thought of his recent vow made him cringe. He wasn't going to kill anyone. He'd been completely out of control. The best thing for him to do was leave the bank. One of the headhunters he'd heard about had an office not 5 minutes away from the city's most exclusive shopping mall, which was straight ahead. He'd brought his briefcase, and his resume was inside. He'd simply see if the man was available. As he got close to the Beverly Hills commercial district, the clean sidewalks, gaily decorated shops, and outdoor cafes gave no hint that the area had ever seen any trouble. But the mall itself, that great opulent jewel, had been under siege for several hours on April 29, before the police stormed the place and shut it down. Not 2 blocks from the mall, the medical offices where his former classmates practiced stretched for nearly a block. Kirk knew he was near it, but the building loomed up before he was quite prepared to see it. The structure was a monstrosity of white marble. As he stared at it, he sensed the old envious rush of astonishment, and the old question came to his mind. How had they been able to do it? If there were other questions, he couldn't bear to ask them. As Kirk turned into the parking lot of the headhunters building, he was completely calm. Yes, he'd leave Angel City. That was the best choice under the circumstances. Also the safest. He didn't know what he was capable of doing if he stayed. End. Brilliant. I haven't read for a month, so I'll make sure that I read the next chapter in a week or so. It's very salient right now, isn't it? The topic. Thanks for listening.